All right, hello. Welcome to the International Knowledge Aware Association's first webinar of 2019 titled Knowledge Management Standards. This is a beginner level webinar, which means you don't have to have prior background knowledge on the subject to understand what's being shared today. All right, so luckily for us, we have Nick Melton guest speaking for us today. I don't know Nick personally, but I have to say that we are extremely excited to have him join us today. He's extremely knowledgeable in knowledge management and is well recognized throughout the industry. To give you a better understanding of his background, I'll briefly read his bio. Nick Melton is the director and co-founder of NOCO with over 25 years of experience in knowledge management. Working with NOCO, Nick has helped develop and deliver knowledge management strategies, implementation plans, and services in a wide range of different organizations around the globe. He has a particular interest in lessons learned programs, and has managed major lessons capture programs, particularly in the areas of mergers and acquisitions and high technology engineering. Prior to founding NOCO, Nick spent 2 years at the center of the team that made BP the leading knowledge management company in the world at that time. Acting as the team knowledge manager, developing and implementing BP's knowledge of how to manage knowledge, and coordinating the BP knowledge management community of practice, Nick is the author and co-author of the following books, such as The Knowledge Manager's Handbook, The Designing a Successful Knowledge Management Strategy. Nick is also a widely recognized coach and trainer and has been giving keynote speeches at most of the leading international knowledge management conferences. He is also a member of the ISO working group, currently developing the knowledge management standard. And to help moderate today's webinar, I'm Brittany Satterfield, the International Knowledge Aware Association's board secretary. If you're unfamiliar with the International Knowledge Aware Association, I want to quickly share who we are and what we do. So the IKAA is a nonprofit organization founded on the premise that there is transformative value in unlocking enterprise knowledge. Our mission is to assist individuals and organizations in transforming through knowledge-aware concepts. If you're interested in learning more about the IKAA, I'll be sharing more details on the organization following the Q&A today. All right, so let's go through the agenda. In 30 minutes today, we'll be covering the following topics. What is ISO? Why a standard for knowledge management? ISO management system standards, using the standard as a guide, and then we'll close it out with Q&A. Keep in mind that you don't have to wait until the end of the webinar to start asking questions. As they come up, feel free to type them in the questions tab in your control panel. We'll just wait until the end to answer them. All right, Nick, if you don't mind, can you start us off by first shedding some light on what is ISO?
Okay, thank you, Brittany. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Jeff, for inviting me to present this webinar. Thanks to IKAA. And I'm here really to talk to you from my role as a member of the team who built the ISO KM standard, which is now on the bookshelves as of late last year. ISO, you're probably all familiar with the concept of ISO standards. ISO doesn't stand for the International Standards Organization. It's from the Greek, ISO meaning equal. And ISO was an international organization put together by national standards bodies who believed that standardization in mature industries is a good thing. It breeds efficiency, it avoids mistakes, it gives us a solid industry platform to build on. And the little map you can see in the left-hand corner, every blue country there is a member body of ISO, and every brown country is a correspondent member. And there's not much left on the globe that's not blue or brown. I can see Greenland, Venezuela, maybe some of the Central African countries, but the rest of the world is part of ISO. ISO has built over 22,000 standards now, many of them standards for manufacturing steel and things like that, you know, standards for how you write dates and times. But there are 63 management systems standards, of which the 63rd and newest is the management systems standard for knowledge management. And that's what we're talking about today. So, what is an ISO standard, and in particular, what is one of these 63 management systems standards that ISO has published? It is a document that provides requirements, specifications, guidelines, etc. That if you follow those requirements, you can say we are up to international standard. The management system standard, as I'll explain a little bit later, has got a set format. Those of you who are familiar with some of the ISO standards like ISO 9001, ISO 12001, 18001, will be familiar with this set template, and the knowledge management standard is no exception. It follows the set template. Some standards have become pretty much mandatory. Standards around safety or security, for example. The ISO 9001 quality standard it's not mandatory, but it's one of those ones where everybody strives to achieve it. That's not necessarily the case for the knowledge management standard, as we shall hear later. They help create products and services that are safe, reliable, good quality. But I think what we're looking at here is doing things well and avoiding common mistakes. Now you're going to have to help me build this one, Brittany, just the first click. I'm going to bust a few myths on standards. First of all, standards do not define how you run your business. Next, please. They are deliberately generic. What the standards do, and you'll find this with the knowledge management standard, they give you a template and you fill in precisely how you're going to do knowledge management and what tools and techniques you will use. But the standard gives you a framework to make sure that you have considered everything. These standards are not only for big business. I don't know quite who's on the call today. I can't see all of the attendees, I'm afraid. But those of you from smaller and medium-sized enterprises, the standard is for you as well. And for you, if you're a small organization, it will help you put in solid foundations from the start. Next, please. Yeah, it should not be a burden to implement the standard. I should look at it not as something imposed on you externally, but as an opportunity. An opportunity to say, have we missed something? Are we up to international standard in the way we address knowledge management? And then final click on this one. Yeah, there's no mandatory requirement for you to be audited against the knowledge management standard. In fact, there's no mandatory requirement in any of the ISO standards. You can implement a standard and you can claim to be compliant. It's entirely up to you. Okay, let's take the next slide, and I'll just remind you that you can ask questions at any time using the question pane on the right of your screen. So why have we got a standard for knowledge management? Why have we written this 63rd management system standard? Well, the proposal for this came in early 2015, and it was a proposal from the Israeli Standards Organization, and they based their proposal on 3 criteria. Firstly, I think we would all agree that knowledge management is increasingly recognized as important. It is a key management discipline. It's there with quality management, risk management, and if you're not doing it, you're not managing properly. However, there is a degree of ambiguity in what actually constitutes knowledge management. Is it the same as information management rebadged? Is it the same as data management with a fancy name? What is it? What is the scope of the topic? And also, and again, I think we'd all agree with this, there are a lot of failures of knowledge management. When we look around the world, we look at KM projects, they certainly used to have, I don't know if they still do, they used to have an 80% failure rate, according to McKinsey. And they often failed for common reasons. And what the standard could do, the Israelis suggested, is cut this failure rate, give people a better chance, provide them with a template to give solid foundations for their knowledge management efforts. The countries around the world voted on this proposal. It was passed with a majority, and work started on drafting the standard. Okay, can we have the next slide? There we go. Now, this is one of these management system standards. Each standard in ISO is handled by a technical committee, and there are hundreds of these technical committees. They usually cover products, like, you know, there's one for steel, and there's one for cars, and there's one for Chinese medicine, that sort of thing. And our first challenge was to find a technical committee where it made sense to house knowledge management. That was a long search. There was nothing really obvious, and eventually the Human Resources Technical Committee, TC260, volunteered to look after KM. We set up our working group 6, and we set to work, and over a period of several years, we came out with the first committee draft in late 2017, which opened for public comment in December of that year, and some of you may well have seen and may even have commented on the draft at that point. We got over 700 comments back from the public, so those who did comment, thank you very much indeed. Each of those comments was discussed and incorporated into the final draft of the standard, which was released November of last year. And you can see on the organisation chart to the right how the working group 6, the committee that wrote the standard, was supported by what they call mirror committees in a number of countries. BSI in the UK, BIN in Germany, AFNOR in France, and ANSI in the US. I think there were about 15 different countries contributing to this standard through their mirror committees. Okay, here's our working group. Here's a picture of the working group meeting in London just before we all headed for the airport. I'm at the back there, third from the left. In front of me is Mariah, who was the convener of the working group. She was from the Israeli Standards Organization. We had 64 people on that working group, or at least on the mailing list, but they didn't all turn up to every meeting. I didn't turn up to every meeting. I missed the one in Singapore, the one in Galveston, Texas. We had our meetings around the world, working on this draft, word by word, paragraph by paragraph, clause by clause, and then taking it back to the mirror committees. And I know the UK mirror committee had, I think it was 23 people. Again, not all of whom would attend every meeting, but they were all involved in reviewing drafts. So if you scale this up, this was a huge number of people actually involved in creating this standard, even before it went to public review. So let's look at the standard itself, and let's see first of all what it is and what it isn't. It is not a standard way to manage knowledge. That would be crazy. The standard is supposed to apply to organizations of every size in every sector around the world, and the way that Boeing or Apple might address knowledge management is very different from, say, a 20-person startup in a garage in Palo Alto. So it's not an attempt to make everybody do KM the same way, nor is it, as was stated by some people, nor is it a consultant's charter to print money. None of us who worked on the standard were paid. This was all purely voluntary. What this is a set of standards for a KM management system. So it's the system is the standard, not the contents of the system, if you see what I mean. So we're not trying to get people to do KM the same way, but we're trying to put up a standard system around KM. And this will ensure that there is a degree of management consistency and consistent with the way that you manage risk or quality or safety or security. So this is a sort of well-established level of consistency. And through this, we hope to avoid some of those common pitfalls of the past. So look at it as something that will help you, a way to check what you're doing against a well-considered template. And look at it that way rather than the requirement for accreditation, which, to be honest, you can't have yet anyway, as I will explain. So, Standard 30401, this is the one that we're dealing with. Let's look at the format for the standard, and it is at the same format as every management system standard. As I said, they follow a template, and the template has 10 components, and each of those 10 components has got standard text, which we cannot delete, but we can add to. But in the case of the management of the knowledge management standard, we added an introduction and an annex, and in those we could freeform, we could write what we wanted. The difference is that the 10 standard elements of the standard contain text that you must comply with if you are to claim compliance with the standard. Every time you see in the body of the text the word shall, you know that's something you've got to do to be in compliance with this standard. And there are 56 uses of the word shall within the body text. There are no uses of the word shall within the introduction and the appendices, because these are just advisory and explanatory rather than requirements. So I'm going to go through the structure piece by piece, and we'll look first of all at the introduction and the scope. Okay, the introduction, as I say, this is advisory text. It covers the purpose of the standard. It says why KM is important. It gives the guiding principles, the 7 principles that we built this standard upon, and I think these are well worth reading because everything else hangs on those. And it also talks about some of the boundaries of knowledge management, where the scope of knowledge management ends. More of that in the appendices. Then we go into the numbered body of the text. Number 1, the scope. We're talking about knowledge management. We're talking about all organizations, any size, any sector, any product, any service, all are in scope. Number 3 is a section on definitions, and this was the occasion of long discussion and much debate. And I think we did pretty well. Well, I like the definitions we came up with. The thing is, a definition has to be definitive rather than explanatory. And what you can do in the ISO standard is you can explain in what is called notes to entry. So we define knowledge in terms of what it does, a human or organizational asset that enables good decisions and effective action in context. And then we can explain that further in the notes to entry, such as knowledge is acquired through learning or experience. Knowledge management was the occasion of the greatest debate and the longest discussion. And we came out with a very simple definition, which I think is pretty ironclad and actually works very well when you put it against the definitions for quality or risk, for example. Knowledge management is management with regard to knowledge. It's how you manage your organization with knowledge as a focus. And then we've explained that a little bit more in the note to entry. It's systemic, it's holistic, it includes optimization of all of these different aspects of the way that you work with knowledge. Okay, number 4, the knowledge management system. And now here we encounter the first of the shall statements. And each of these sections defines what you need to do to be compliant with the standard. First of all, you need to define how KM supports the context of the organization. Secondly, you have to make sure that you have considered and defined the needs of stakeholders, that you have defined the scope of the KM system, what's in, what's out, even to the extent of defining critical knowledge which needs to be managed. And then we talk about what you need to consider within the KM system itself. And when I say consider, I don't mean include. I mean that we need to consider knowledge through its entire development cycle, from its creation through its optimization, all the way through it to its archiving and deleting, for example. We need to cover the transitions of knowledge, taking it from people's heads, putting it within documents, taking it back into people's heads, how it passes from person to document and back. And we need to think about the roles, the processes, the technologies, and the governance, and potentially the culture that are the enablers that make this happen. I put culture in double brackets there because this again was an area of great discussion, whether culture is an enabler of knowledge management or whether it is an outcome of knowledge management. And we decided in the end that it was both. More about culture in the appendices. Leadership and planning. There's a lot in the standard about leadership, about ensuring you have the commitment from leadership, that commitment expressed in a knowledge management policy, and that that leaders have set aside and delegated the roles, responsibilities, and authorities for knowledge management. And this is all important stuff. Number 6 is about planning, addressing risks and opportunities to KM, and defining your knowledge objectives and planning to achieve them. Now, as I go through, I'm not showing you, other than the definitions, I'm not showing you any of the text that goes into these sections, because that text is copyright ISO. If you buy the standard, you can see it. What I'm giving you is some idea of the structure and what is contained within it. And in that text lies those 56 shall statements. Support is making sure that your organization has the support resources, the competence, the awareness, the communication, and the documented information about the KM system itself that are required for people to be able to deliver against their accountabilities. We move on to Section 8, operational planning. Section 9, monitoring, measuring, analysing your KM system, internally auditing it on a regular basis, reviewing it with management, continuously improving it, and dealing with any non-conformities. So again, this is all good, sensible management theory applied to KM. That's the end of our shall statements. The next section of the standard is the annexes at the end, and here again we go back to free form. So we've got some discussion documents for people who are new to KM, looking at things like the spectrum of knowledge from fully tacit all the way through to fully embedded in code and machinery. We've looked at the boundaries between KM and the surrounding disciplines, particularly information management, and particularly human resource management and training. And then we've got a complete section on KM culture. There was a lot of debate about whether to be big on culture in the text of the standard or whether to put it in the appendix. And I think we have made the right decision to put it in the appendix. But I've got 3 or 4 slides now to talk about how to use the standard. And the first way you can use it is as a guide. Not necessarily to check against, but to guide you into doing the right thing, to tell you what's special about KM, where to start, what you need to consider, what you need to eventually put in place. And I think if you follow the standard when you're starting out, you'll miss a lot of the common pitfalls that have killed so many KM programs in the past. Now, if you're not starting, if you're well established in KM, then you can use it as something to measure yourself against. So if we could have the next slide, please, Brittany. And here's where you audit against the standard, either internally or externally. You would go around, you'd talk to people, you'd look at documents, and you'd look for evidence that you comply with those 56 shall requirements. You can document that compliance, you can identify areas where you're non-compliant, you can put things in place to close the gaps. Now, why would you want to do that? On the next slide, we've got 5 people who might be interested in whether you are compliant with an international standard for knowledge management. First of all, your own team, your KM team, might like to know if there's any gaps and anything they need to do. Your management in particular might want to know if you've got international standard KM. And this would be, for those of you who are working in KM teams, this can be a really useful tool to work through with your management, because there's many things they should be doing defined by the standard, which will be extremely helpful to you. The KM policy, for example, or some of the leadership actions. When I presented the standard in the UK Knowledge Management Conference last year, a couple of guys came up to me in the coffee break and said, look, this is going to be really useful to us. We're engineers, we work in an engineering organization. The engineers all tell us that knowledge management isn't a real discipline. Well, now we've got an ISO standard, we've got that stamp of authority. So this stamp of authority is something that you can use internally. Your clients, if you're doing work or providing services to clients, then the knowledge of that work and those services is something that you sell, and compliance with ISO 30401 should reassure your clients that you are managing that knowledge on their behalf. And indeed, your potential clients, if you're bidding for work or bidding for services, then compliance with ISO 30401 again could be a selling point to show that you handle knowledge responsibly. So 5 potential interested parties. Right, next slide. What you cannot do yet, and I don't know whether this will ever happen, is you cannot be certified against this standard in the way that you can be certified against ISO 9001. Why not? Because to be certified against ISO 9001, you need audit by trained auditors working for a certification body which has been accredited by a higher level body. And those certification bodies do most of their work against about half a dozen of the management system standards, not all 63 by any means. And if you look at the UK accreditation service, they only accredit certification bodies against 16 of those standards and not all 63. So it's not even possible to have that level of accreditation against ISO 30401. It may never be possible. It's a business decision for the certification bodies and the accreditation authorities. So there you are, there's ISO 30401, that's how it came about. There's the structure of the standard, and there are 2 ways in which you can use it, and one in which you can't use it yet, although that may happen in the future. That's pretty much all I wanted to say. I guess you've got some questions. Brittany, have you received any questions?
Yes, we actually had a few come in. The first question was, how does NOCO plan to use the new standard directly in its own consulting practice?
Own consulting practice. That's an interesting one. NOCO is a very small organization, but we could review ourselves against the standard and see if we are compliant. We're such a small, I mean, I have no employees, I have no HR department, but we could still look at the things we do and see whether we are compliant. I think we are in a very small scale way, but primarily what we'll do is make sure that any recommendations we make to our clients from now on are 30401 compliant.
All right, awesome. All right, one more question because we're running out of time. What were the top 3 reasons for the past failures of knowledge management systems?
Oh, top reasons for the past failures. I think you know some of them. Buying technology and assume that will solve all your problems. Neglecting the cultural aspect. Trying to roll out KM as a big bang mandate from the top down. All sorts of things. Neglecting the issue of value, both value to the organization and value to the individual. If you look on my blog, I've got the top 7 reasons for failure, of which I've just given you perhaps the top 3.
All right, awesome. Well, unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I'm going to have to pass on the rest of the Q&A. If there are any other questions, I'll make sure that we email you back the responses, the questions that came in.
Yeah, email me your questions. I'm very happy to answer them. Can I just finish by saying I'm proud of this standard. It was a lot of work, but I think this is something that's going to be really useful to you and to the industry.
Oh, absolutely. It's going to help a lot of organizations. So, all right, before we close out, I'm going to quickly mention the IKAA. The IKAA is here to help organizations succeed with the knowledge-aware approach. The IKAA offers many complementary resources. However, that there are many that are only available to the IKAA members. So these members have exclusive access to knowledge-aware resources and trainings, and they have unique opportunities to network with their peers. Members stay up to date with their industry best practices and receive complimentary passes to the annual knowledge-aware conference. As you can see, there are many benefits that come with being a member. But you can see our pricing on the right side of the screen. However, from now until June of this year, the IKAA is waiving the membership fees for anyone interested in joining. So I'd like to urge you to please take advantage of this offer. It's only going to be available for a limited time. If you're interested in joining as a member, you can visit the International Knowledge Aware Association's website at knowledge-aware.org. And I want to take a quick minute again to thank you, Nick, very much. You did an excellent job sharing more about the standards. You obviously have a lot of experience in this industry, and I'm sure everyone here listening took away many, many important things. So again, thank you. And if anyone online has any more questions, you can email us at info@knowledge-aware.org or contact us through our website, knowledge-aware.org. Is there anything else you'd like to add on to that, Nick?
Yeah, if you'd like to send me a list of the questions that you received and I didn't have time to answer, Brittany, I can write a quick answer to email back out to everybody.
Absolutely. All right, thanks again, and thank you everyone for joining in. We hope to see you in our next webinar.